welcome to our second session of the series, Writing for Choir, presented by Harold Rosenbaum. Since there are so many of us, we have put everyone on mute. This is just to avoid extra feedback or background noise during the session. To unmute yourself and communicate with Harold during the session, you can hold down the space bar. And if you release it, it'll mute yourself automatically. So that's the easiest. But if that doesn't work for you, you can use the microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner to mute and unmute yourself. We just ask that if you're not communicating with Harold, that you keep yourself on mute. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session that's open to anyone. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and Harold will call on you to answer. Additionally, if you would like to ask Harold a question about an original choral composition, you can send the PDF to my email, cantacorum.virtuosi.inc@gmail.com, so that we can present your piece during the lecture. Please submit only the relevant page of your piece that you have a question for. If we run out of time tonight for Q&A, or that you have any additional questions that come up out of after the session is over, Harold is offering free conducting and composing sessions throughout the month of January. Simply email harold@haroldrosenbaum@gmail.com and he can set up a meeting with you personally. I'll be sending over more information about the organization and about Harold to the chat box, which includes all of these emails that I've just given you, as well as a donation link. Harold is giving all of these sessions free to the public, and he's donating his time so generously. So if you're interested in donating, any and all donations are greatly appreciated. These donations go to supporting Cantacorum Virtuosi, Inc., which is the non-for-profit that provides funding for all of Harold's New York-based choirs. These deductions are tax deductible. Fun fact. In the chat box, there's also my email address. You can use that or the chat box itself to request any technological assistance.
Okay, while you get the first page up, we're going to start where we stopped last week, everybody. While she's doing that, let me just say that next week is the first, I don't know, maybe that's number 17 out of 30 sessions I'm doing this whole year. But I will be joined by 4 professional singers. And I'm going to basically lay low. I mean, they're going to give their talks on what they would like to see from composers more often. Okay, for those of you who were not here last week, first of all, these are archived. If you have any question where you can view it, you can just, let Karina know that you want to do that, and she'll tell you how to do that. But basically, at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote a little tiny book or article, maybe you want to call it, and I haven't had it published yet, but here it is. And I'm just going through, I'm calling it Choralstration, a practical guide for composers. Because, my first book was a practical guide for conductors. And I just, this is a section in which I'm just rattling off one thing after another. There's no rhyme or reason to it, but things that just came to my mind. Or actually, I did organize it somewhat. But Karina, where's that? Okay, can you go just to the end of the page so I can see that? Yeah, that's the last. Yeah, I believe we stopped sort of halfway through here, this page. Yeah. So let's just start from halfway down in 4/4 time. So these are suggestions for composers who want to make it easier for conductors and singers. Conductors first, because if a conductor is looking at a piece, many pieces, before making a choice, choices what to conduct, and there are a lot of questionable notations or annoying things or omissions, it's a turnoff. So I'm trying to make it easier for you guys to get beyond the conductor. And then some of these things I'm mentioning, as I said last week, might not be things that professional editors, which are hired by, publishers, would actually put in the music when it's published. But they're things that just make it easier for conductors. So what you might do, if your piece has not been published yet, you might want to include a lot of the things that might be not standard to the industry, but it would make it easier for us to perform. And then if you get your piece published, you can submit some or all of these things or none of them. Well, most of them you would do anyway, but there are just little things like if a page, if page 1 through 5 have one system on the page, and then page 6 has two systems, you might want to just at the bottom of the preceding page, which has one system, you might want to put an arrow, a diagonal arrow, which means go to the have your eye ready to go to the top of the page and not view the whole page as a unit. Things like that. Anyway, let's go on. In 4/4 time, if the last note of the piece has a fermata on it and you are intending to make it a dotted half note followed by a quarter rest, it would be better to make it a whole note. Yeah, I mean, because it's just, this is not something I'm adamant about, but it's going to be more than a dotted half anyway. Let me just change chairs. Mine seems like it's going to break. Hold on a second. I did gain 3 pounds during this pandemic. Hold on. I know. Okay. Here we go. So, if a composer wants a fermata to be a long one, the word lunga should be placed next to or above it. Lunga meaning long, obviously. If it is to be held for a specific number of seconds, well, that's unusual. I mean, a fermata, doesn't mean it should be held for a specific number of seconds, except I've seen a lot of aleatory music where a big long bracket with the number of seconds notated is required. So I'm not actually sure. Again, I'm not a professional editor. If you would put a fermata sign there or just a whole note maybe, and with those brackets making it obvious how long that should be held. In fact, you might not even want to have any meter in that particular measure, obviously. Okay, now you need to, Karina, the right hand is cut off because you made it too big. The right side, I mean. Thank you. Okay, next. Do not assume that conductors know or believe that soon before fermatas generally and immediately before the end of a piece, there is an implied retardando, much, if not most of the time. So if you want to retard notate it, I think personally in my experience conducting over the decades, I whether a fermata comes at the end of a piece or of a section, I think at least 60 or 65% of the time, or maybe more, maybe 75 or 80% of the time, this natural retardando that seems to work well and better and naturally than just plowing into the last note and holding it. Now that doesn't apply to Bach chorales. Well, that's a whole other story because when you see Bach chorales, you see a lot of fermatas which are really sort of markers and not really meant necessarily to be held as a fermata. But there, I wouldn't slow down. Maybe I should add that to my little book here, except for Bach, at least the chorales. Okay, so if during an extended crescendo, you prefer that word, this is interesting. You prefer that word inflections still occur, so that in essence, it would be a choral crescendo is a term I came up with, meaning that not every note is louder than the preceding one, indicate that with periodic note-to-note decrescendo signs. Let me just explain that. If you're in an orchestra and you see a crescendo sign spanning 2 or 3 measures, let's say, then chances are you're going to play every note and every moment, even during notes, louder and louder and louder than what came immediately before it. That's what a crescendo means, steadily get louder. But there are times in choral music when I don't want that. I do want a general crescendo, and I can't really think of any examples at the moment, but I probably could if I thought for a few moments. Where, well, let me think. Okay. Let's take the actual words in this paragraph. If during an extended crescendo, let's say the text of the piece was just that. If during an extended crescendo you prefer that word inflection still occur. Now, there are two ways of doing that. The first way is not a choral crescendo. If during an extended crescendo you prefer that word inflection, well, I'm rising in pitch. I shouldn't do that. If during an extended crescendo you prefer that word inflection still occur, it would be a crescendo. That's but to make it a choral crescendo, and I'll exaggerate just a bit. If during an extended crescendo you prefer that word inflection still occur, see what I mean? I'm still speaking it, I'm singing it, I would be singing it the way you would speak it, so that during this crescendo, you don't pounce on the weak syllables. It's an interesting concept, and it doesn't work all the time. I mean, for example, like the Verdi Requiem, where the basses go, Rex tremende maesta. You know, there's a big crescendo effect, and I don't think you should go, Rex tremende maesta. No, it's just, it needs to plow ahead, you know? Okay, next, a short crescendo sign followed by a similar decrescendo sign, together spanning only 3 notes, might yield the same or even better results if replaced with a tenuto sign on the middle note. Tenuto, again, meaning, like I said last week, just a horizontal line on top of one note, which means a slight accent. But, you know, there is a difference between, you know, I love you and I love you. This tenuto would be more momentary, and the other way would be an actual crescendo, decrescendo. That's the kind of thing you have to think about. I think about all the time. There are like 5 different ways to accent a note, and let me think if I can see if I can think of them all now. But basically, to accent slightly a note, well, to accent a note during a phrase, let's say during a phrase, you can put an accent mark, a real, you know, sideways V. You can put a horizontal line, which means slightly accented. You can crescendo to the note. You can not crescendo to the note, but crescendo during the note, if it's a long enough note. Yeah, and you can even do something like, if it's a word, which has, you know, let's say a voiced consonant, or you know, like mother. Instead of going mother, you go ma, like start a little earlier. Anyway, there are many ways of doing that, and when I do a decrescendo, often I wonder, should it be a half, you know, like in 4/4 time, if on the third beat you have a half note and a decrescendo to the downbeat, should it be a 1-beat crescendo or a decrescendo or a 2-beat decrescendo? It just depends on the circumstances. This is you know, it's like detective work. It's so much fun for me to figure these things out. And again, I should say, I don't know if I told you last week, but I've said a number of times over the months, in all the years I've been conducting, I've never, ever gone to the first rehearsal without singing through every single line of every piece and marking things, marking the expression marks, the breath marks, and all that. Okay, next. Yeah, I mean, I see this a lot. After writing the word crescendo, it is not necessary to generate a crescendo sign a bit later. It's just confusing. I mean, if you've been crescendoing, why put a crescendo sign a little later? It just confuses people. If you want a steady crescendo, which the word crescendo implies, and then you put let's say a very wide crescendo mark towards the end of it, because you want the rate of crescendoing at the last moment to increase, you have to make a note of that, like an asterisk and a footnote, or put that in the preface. Otherwise, it's just confusing. Why the word and then the sign later? And yeah, then I say just the word, perhaps with dashes afterwards, spanning the intended length of the crescendo will suffice. And make sure you have make sure you have, is that, Michael, you raising your hand or you're just adjusting something? Michael Eckert. Okay. You raising your hand?
Sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Okay, at the what? Looking at the what?
If
Okay.
that go, I mean, if you wanted, if the crescendo is long, then you can put, let's say, piano, crescendo, mezzo piano. It's you use
Yeah,
intermediate dynamic markings
absolutely.
to make that happen.
Absolutely. In fact, I do that all the time because virtually none of the time do composers do that. So if there's a crescendo for 8 measures, I very often do that. Good point. Next, it is not necessary to write a diagonal line from one note to the next, plus glissando. Oh, I think I meant oh, but boy, two mistakes here. Karina, can you please make a note? I gotta correct this. Plus glissando or gliss.
Okay, got it.
The diagonal line is a common and recognized indication in contemporary choral music. Well, speaking about that, I think I talked about this last week in another context, that whenever I see a glissando, I wonder if the composer really meant it to start exactly on the note and then going all the way to the next note. Sometimes they want a very small glissando towards the end of the note. So there should be a way of the composer indicating that. If you're not sure how to do it, I mean, if, for example, if you have a whole note in 4/4 time, you might want to make it, a half note and a half note. If the glissando just starts on beat 3, that kind of thing, you might want to put that in the preface. There's nothing wrong with putting your thoughts in the preface. Um, is there really any reason to ever write anything in C flat major or C sharp major? You might think so, but the singers would be much happier if it could be a half step lower or higher. Um, that reminds me of a 15-second story. A friend of mine who is my age, because I went to high school with him, he's a psychiatrist, reminded me just 2 days ago that when I was the music director of my high school play, I think it was Oliver, and I played Fagin, by the way, but I never thought I'd actually look like Fagin at this point in my life. But anyway, I was auditioning him, and I said, "What key do you want to sing this piece?" He was going to be in the show as a soloist. He said F sharp major. So I just said, I'm playing it in G major. Forget that, And anyway, that's has absolutely nothing to do with this, but it was a funny story. Um, Instead of marking soprano solo or tenor solo, simply write solo above the appropriate staff. You know, be certain to mark tutti when all the voices in that section return. Thus, it is unnecessary to write end solo and then at the next entrance soprano section. Anyway, I've only seen this recently and only one composer did this. It's just keep it simple. If the section returns on the downbeat of the next system, wait until then to mark tutti, unlike new or returning key signatures or new meters, which should be placed at the end of the previous system, as well as the beginning of the new one. Okay, all 4 parts move in a similar fashion, each containing many notes per measure, similar rhythmic activity, and the same dynamics. 3 of the 4 land on a long note, the remaining one continues in the same manner for a bit longer. Then all 4 cut off together. In this scenario, you might want to immediately taper those who have stopped moving. In terms of dynamics, Karina, can you please make a note of that? I have to clarify that. Taper the dynamics for those who have stopped moving so that the message of the fourth could be better discerned. This can be notated. Well, maybe I don't have to modify this because I say this can be notated with a slight decrescendo immediately before or just when the remaining line continues along. It's just that I find that composers, and when I say composers, obviously not everyone, but in this case, the vast majority of them don't think of such subtle things like this. And this is what the composer has to work out. And it's fun to work them out, but I wouldn't mind having the composer putting all these things so I wouldn't have to do so much work. I mean, some conductors have 5 choirs at one time, and there's a lot of 10 pieces per concert for each one. There's a lot to do, a lot to handle. One year I had 11 choirs at one time, but that's another story. Okay, it is difficult to comprehend what a composer means when piano, along with sottovoce or mezza voce are indicated. It is unnecessary and confusing to have anything but the dynamic marking when the music is that soft, because any attempt to modify or add something to the very soft sound while trying to heed descriptive words like those, sottovoce or mezza voce, would yield the same results. In other words, um, yeah, same thing with pianissimo and echo. If something's pianissimo, then it makes no sense to put sottovoce or mezza voce because it's just so soft. You can't really modify it, or even why should you think of anything else than just pianissimo? Next, legato singing is the most natural and commonly occurring style. Therefore, it is not necessary to put the word legato into the score, I think, unless prior to that you had marked marcato or poco marcato or a non-legato indication. Yeah, espressivo is the same as legato, I think. I mean, because for me, legatos should be expressive, which means smooth and expressive, which is never necessary to mark unless you want to reinforce the legato concept after you have asked for non-legato singing immediately before that. Sure. Do not hesitate to put a few accents or staccato markings into an otherwise legato passage, again, without having to mark legato anywhere. See what I just did? I put a few staccatos, but it doesn't mean the rest of it isn't legato. However, if you wish for a line which is generally marcato to have moments of legato, or poco marcato or staccato, you can put markings under individual notes to indicate any of those changes instead of starting off with the word marcato and then having to contradict that general feeling frequently. That might not be totally clear. Let me just say that again. However, if you wish for a line which is generally marcato to have moments of legato, poco marcato, or staccato, you can put markings under individual notes to indicate any of those changes instead of starting off with the word marcato and then having to contradict that general feeling frequently. I'm not even sure exactly what I mean. I think I know what I mean, but I'm not explaining it well here. So let's just skip over that because I don't want to waste anybody's time. The quality of the entire chorus's timbre changes in the upper region of their ranges. This can produce vibrant, shimmering sounds in very good choirs, but strained and rather unpleasant sounds in very amateur ones. In the latter case, an occasional foray would be better than residing there for an extended period. Obviously, you don't want a high school choir, for example. Well, high school kids, they have healthy lungs, but let's face it, if you have a chorus with a lot of senior citizens, you might not want to have them sing a lot of high B flats, if you know what I mean. Okay. If your piece has an element of, and I'm a senior citizen myself, so I can say this. If your piece has an element of microtonality, intervals smaller than semitones, that, for example, quarter steps, understands that the singers will try their best, but that the pitches you request will only be approximate. I speak from experience. I commissioned Michael Gordon. He's one of the three who started banging a can. David Lang. I commissioned David Lang. I have not commissioned Julia Wolf, but I commissioned Michael Gordon once, and he wrote a piece for double chorus. And the first chorus, sang their notes, and the second chorus, he said everything is to be done a quarter step down, a quarter step down. So my professional singers, to the person, said, "Okay, we'll try our best, but it's impossible to do it exactly a quarter step down." Composers should be able to conduct their own works as well as the works of others. Stravinsky was a strong proponent of that tenet. Situations might arise in which you will find yourself in front of an ensemble of which you were when observing others. Many of the great composers in the past took up conducting as well. Copland late in life, Benjamin Britten did. I think Shostakovich, well, at least his son, but that's another story. Anyway, John Adams, right? Yeah. So if you're a serious composer, you should study conducting. Definitely. I mean, that's what Stravinsky actually said. There's a quote by Stravinsky that said that. Um, now there's a bit of a story here. I don't know if I want to go through this. Let's look at the next page, Karina. While still in graduate school. Let's skip over this. Let's just scroll down a bit more. Yeah. Unconventional ideas to help conductors. Unconventional ideas for composers to help conductors. Here is a novel and quirky idea. If you have just finished a piece that a publisher is interested in, you might incorporate some of the following ideas for rehearsals and its world premiere, and then clean it up before it is officially engraved and made ready for publication. God bless all the wonderful publishers out there, but they might not want some of these unorthodox suggestions to appear in their engraved scores. I mean, a lot of things I said above applies here, but these are more direct and maybe more unconventional. Having a long vertical line at the end of each system on the right-hand margin from the soprano staff all the way down to the left-hand piano staff. I mean, this is what I do in my scores a lot. When they're complex, I mean, not Renaissance music, for example, necessarily. Can you scroll up? Let me see more of the page. Okay, wait. Having a long vertical line at the end of each system from the soprano. Oh, yeah. On the left-hand side of every page, you have a long vertical line. But on the right-hand side, there are no vertical lines. You know, at the very end of the system, it's just the system, the staff. You know what I'm talking about. Let me just get a piece of music paper. I'm saying if you have this on the right-hand side, wait, let me just, you know, if you have this, which you do in scores, and you might have double lines at sometimes like SATB, you have a bracket, you know, why not have one there? And the reason is, for me, it helps me to know that there's only one system on the page. You know what I mean? It's just any visual aid you can do would be great. If a page, the next paragraph, if a page has two systems and the next has one, I talked about this already. Okay. Ooh, there's a dot. Karina, you see that? Before chapter 3, there's a dot before the word on. Okay, we got to get rid of that. All right. Chapter 3, the Octavo. Okay, well, these things, you know, most composers know about, but some don't. So let me just quickly do this. You can just read it on your own. Well, I'll read it. The Octavo booklet containing pertinent information in addition to your score will be discussed next. Some of the worded content has been discussed. All right, next paragraph. It might seem obvious to all composers what information should be on the cover on its reverse side. However, let us make sure you have covered everything. You know, obviously the title of your piece and the name. You may wish to include the performing forces. That's most of you, I'm sure, would do that. The inside cover should display the text and its source with the poet's or author's dates, the translation, if it is not in English, unless you prefer to place it under the English words in the score itself. Your short bio, your notes and performance suggestions, the year the piece was completed, and the timing. The timing is really, really, really important. If you want to get past the conductor and have your piece performed, then put the timing in, because if I'm putting together a program with 8 pieces, and I have to actually, and I've done this countless times, I notice the metronome marking, and I time it, measure by measure, or I say, okay, it's in 4/4, and it's quarter equals 60, so 15 measures equals a minute. But what if it goes from 4/4 to 3/4 and 7/8 all throughout the piece? Then you have to actually sit there and time the whole piece, and you know. Then when you halfway through the piece, you're starting to get mad at the composer for not doing it, and you'll throw the piece away. You get my point. I'm exaggerating, but put the timing. Why not? Or don't be like Milton Babbitt, God bless him, who would put like 1 minute and 13.5 seconds. Because then you freak out. You say, oh God, what if it's 1 minute and 13.8 seconds? He's not going to be happy. You might want to put approximately, putting the approximate left. Okay, when they begin the process of choosing repertoire. Okay, I said all this. Okay, next paragraph. In addition to this, there might be a need to provide special instruction should there be unusual notations of any kind. And if the language is one which is rarely observed when studying choral repertoire like Danish, Portuguese, or Malay, I think I must have looked that up because I did a piece by a Malaysian composer. And yeah, he was there to help us with the pronunciation, but you should have a pronunciation guide. You might even put, I just thought of this, you might even put a link to your website where you can hire somebody, or ask a Malaysian friend or a Portuguese friend to speak it. I mean, I don't know how many of you know the series on, I don't know, Prime Video, Doc Martin. It's a great comedy and it's a great series. And I saw an interview with him, and he said that the real Doc Martin actually taped the pronunciations of all the diseases and medications. So it was very helpful for him. Okay. The layout of the score. Portrait is better than landscape. Portrait is, a portrait is, it's, and the landscape is very wide, and landscape, it's difficult to hold, and, it spills over it spills over the music stand. It's not easy to negotiate, but if it has to be, it has to be, I can't tell you how many, this is letter B now, I can't tell you how many pieces are just too small, the font is too small. I had to work with even some rather experienced composers. I had to keep asking for a larger score. I knew that, and I sent a picture of a published piece by Brahms, which had a lot larger notes, just as many staves per page, and I don't know how one does that. I don't use Sibelius or Finale. I don't know how you do it, but there has to be a way to make the singers happy. That's the point. Okay, and if that produces a score with fewer measures per system and thus more pages, so be it. Letter C, be sure there is enough space between systems. If there is an inch between each stave on the page, there should be at least twice that between systems. Okay, letter D. If it's up to you to print and supply scores, choose a heavy enough stock which ensures that one cannot see the notes on the reverse side, and which as a byproduct makes it easier to turn pages. If you submit a piece to a conductor, don't whether it's engraved or not, don't just bind it. Don't staple the pages together on the top left-hand corner. That really is not cool, because if a conductor is rather serious about a piece and he puts it on the music stand of his piano, puts it on the piano rack, and it's just held together with a staple on the upper left-hand corner, think of it. It's just hard. I mean, when you're almost finished with the piece, you have 3 pages left, suddenly all 3 pages will flip over to the back of the rack. All right, writing for choir. Oh, avoid plastic coils, letter E. I mean, we've all seen music with plastic coils. Plastic is great, except when you go into the recording studio. So that makes noise. Okay, chapter 5, writing for choir and orchestra. Okay, this is where I say balance here. This is not something you have to worry about, I guess, as a composer, but I think you're going to be hopefully, having conductors with various types of choirs and abilities of choirs, whether it's an a cappella piece or with instruments or full orchestra, and you should know about this. I think with a very good volunteer choir, there should be at least 75 singers if there are 50 players. And for if it's a really average volunteer choir, average meaning not all that great, untrained voices, at least 2 singers per player. I was stunned between you and me when I went to Utah about 2 years ago to do a residency in the University of Utah, and I went to a Thursday evening rehearsal of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. They have a full orchestra, and they have a choir of 360 people, and I just walked into the rehearsal hall, the temple, I forget what you call it, one of the great big buildings in and I heard their sound. It was so diffuse. It was so sort of, I don't know what to call it. It was diffuse. It sounded like a lot of very wonderful people and wonderful, musicians and having a great time. But the sound, it wasn't a professional sound. Of course, it's not a professional choir, but I had to take a step back and say, whoa, this is, there are a lot of untrained voices in this choir. And there's nothing wrong with that, but for your sake, if you have a choice of how large the instrumental ensemble is, for example, and the choir you're writing for, and they're a very amateur choir, so you don't want to have, and it's a chamber choir or a choir of 40, you don't want to have a lot of brass. You know what I mean? You want to just figure out what the occasion is. For a professional choir, at least one per one. Well, I had an experience when I did I did Mahler's Eighth, Schoenberg's Gurulita, and Beethoven's Missa Solemnis at the Bard Festival with my very expanded New York Virtuoso Singers, which generally has 16 singers, but we expanded it to 120 when we were hired to supply 120 professionals. And the first thing I said to the I forget, it wasn't Leon Botstein who made the approach to me, some official administrator. I said, what's the size of the orchestra? And they said 120. And I said, well, the choir of 120 is not large enough for an orchestra of 120. He's going to have to keep the orchestra down in certain places when all the brass plays, like in the Mahler. And the balance wasn't great some of those times. It's tricky, Okay, let's just skip complexity. Let's skip over that a minute. Just skip. Collaborating with the conductor. Oh, now this is a sample agreement, but it's a little bit antiquated. I have 2 agreements here in my book. One is a commissioning agreement, which this isn't. This is the commissioning agreement. Yeah. So let's just skip over this because it doesn't take into account streaming and other things. This is the ASCAP agreement because I worked with ASCAP to ASCAP Foundation to commission 50 composers. Yeah, let's just skip over this a minute. Keep going. Okay, interacting. This is interesting because as a conductor, I've interacted with composers hundreds of times, literally. Before the rehearsals, but then during the rehearsal, do I really want the composer to sit there and break to my rehearsal? No. But beforehand, you should discuss the basics. What level of difficulty is the conductor expecting of your piece? How long should the piece be? Who chooses the text? If you be certain to run your choice by the conductor before you begin writing the work. Most of this you know already. Be sensitive to the personnel in the choir and to the surrounding community. If you are writing for a youth choir, be extra careful not to use text that may be offensive or which may frighten the children. One composer I commissioned, I'll tell you his name because I respect him so much, Conrad Tao, you might know him. Go back up. He wrote a piece. He's a brilliant pianist and a wonderful man. He's only in his mid-20s, but he's already quite well known. He wrote a piece for the New York Philharmonic, for example, but he wrote a piece which scared the kids. They would have scared my youth choir, some of the words, and I asked him to modify them, and he did. It was all about, I don't know, rats eating the wires in cars, something like that. It was just disgusting. Anyway, it may also be judicious to ask the conductor of the youth choir if he or she believes that each parent should approve the text before committing to have their children sing it. Okay. Yeah, and then there's the time when I commissioned Ellen Tafe Swillick to write a piece, and she, yeah, it's on YouTube. You can see it. You just type in Swillich Memorial. That's right before letter B. You see that? She wrote it for the children. It was about the Sandy Hook massacre, and the children sing the names of the deceased children. And of course, we didn't want to just bring it to the rehearsal, have the kids look at it. We asked the parents and all the children, and they said, they want to do it to honor the fallen victims. Letter B, make sure your piece is a good fit for the choir. Get to know this by attending rehearsals or listening to recordings of the ensemble. Nobody wants to be disappointed, not the singers, nor you or the conductor. If you underestimate the level of the choir, singers might be bored or disinterested. If you overestimate it, singers will be frustrated and embarrassed and perhaps angry at you and the conductor. Discuss vocal ranges with the conductor before you commence the writing process. Although you may refer to or know a standard voice range description or chart, the conductor might guide you somewhat differently according to the makeup of the choir. I talked about this a little bit last week, so let's just go on. Letter D, there is no need to show the conductor your piece before it is finished. When it is finished, ask the conductor for a meeting or send her or him the score. Be prepared for comments and perhaps a few suggestions from the conductor, hopefully all helpful and kind. A thoughtful, accomplished, and considerate conductor will likely not propose any changes that are unrealistic or which impinge on your artistry. On the contrary, excitement and gratitude should be the norm. On the flip side, be sure to explain to the conductor concepts, feelings, inner sentiments, and interpretive ideas that do not necessarily leap off the pages so that your intent is considered and attempted. One of the key ones to discuss is the use of glottal stops. I think I talked about that last week, so I'm not going to do that now. Discuss your attendance at rehearsals. It is likely that the conductor will welcome your presence, but not until the process is far along enough that you will not have to witness the note learning process. I think I told that story when I did a concert of John Corigliano and his significant other, Mark Adamo, and they attended almost every rehearsal. I mean, I had like 8 rehearsals. They were there from the rehearsal 2 on. We were just woodshedding. It was, but they wanted to be there. That's fine. They didn't interfere very much at all. So if the conductor prefers that you not say anything during the rehearsal, but rather confer during the break or after rehearsal, abide by that. If a choir member asks a question about the score during a rehearsal you are attending, the conductor might defer to you. If you cannot attend rehearsals, try to set up a video communication on somebody's laptop or another device so that you can weigh in from afar. Letter F, during or after attending a rehearsal, if you need to make some adjustments upon realizing that you miscalculated a dynamic or need to adjust the tempo or modify underlay, do not hesitate to bring that to the conductor's attention. However, notice I say during or after attending. During, now let's get to this where the arrow is. However, walking a fine line between being helpful and insensitive to the conductor's schedule, please err on the side of caution. At the dress rehearsal, be careful to abide by the conductor's wishes. If she or he intends to read through each half of the program, which can consist of 5 different pieces, by the way, before commenting to the singers and asking for your input, accept that. If you sense that or are told by the conductor that time is running, I think I have too many that's in there, Karina. If you sense that, never mind. If you sense that, or are told by the conductor that time is running short because there are many other pieces to deal with, do not overstay your welcome. Undoubtedly, the conductor will be willing to hear further thoughts from you directly after the rehearsal or later that day. Always be grateful, complimentary, and congratulatory after the performance. You really should. I mean, everybody was working really hard. I mean, who would not try to do justice? Can you scroll down a bit, please? I had one, I'm certainly not going to mention the name, but one composer who was sitting there at the dress rehearsal with my professional choir, like this, not the whole time, but like this. And then, and then backstage after the concert, she came over to me, I won't mention her name, and said, "Congratulations, Maestro," and walked away. I mean, really, nice job. It was like something she, needed to say, but she wouldn't go any further. And I had already seen her with her head in her hands and the dress rehearsal, but I felt it was a fantastic performance. And she's kind of known for that kind of behavior anyway. So,
Harold, just to let you know, it is 7:50, just so you are aware.
I'm happy to go right till 8, even a little bit beyond, depending on how many questions we have. How many people might have questions? You want to raise your hand, and Karina, and you'll see.
Let's take a poll. If you think you have a question, just raise your hand real quick so I can get an idea. At this point, okay, we have one. We have just like one question that I see.
Okay.
But we'll still
yeah. All right, well, let's go a little more.
Make room for more.
Want to ask you a question now, Kevin? I don't mind.
Well, it's one of those, I don't know if it's really needed to be asked, but I'll ask it anyway. It has to do with format, preferable size of the pages, it's like, it's really easy for me to print out my own stuff if it's small, but
yeah.
But if, for an orchestral and choral thing together, it's like, I've seen it done in so many ways where the chorus wouldn't have the full score. They would have just a smaller folio, and then, of course, the orchestra is a whole different thing for the full score. It's just,
yeah. I know. Well, first of all, singers do not like, and I do not like when they have just these vocal lines, with the number 16 measures of rest, just the vocal lines. They hate that because they need, and even when there are cues written in small notes. So I understand that publishers save money. I mean, I have right here next to me, I have like Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, which I know now I'll never want to be involved with since he was a Nazi sympathizer. But anyway, Carmina Burana's vocal scores, for example, are just that. Look, if you can help it not to go above 12 or 14 inches, that would be great. But I know sometimes it's not possible to, for the conductor, it's not possible to limit it to that. I mean, let me show you. Do I have it handy? Hold on 1 second. I think I do. Hold on. I'll be right there. I mean, look at the size of this. It's about, 18 inches high, but it sort of has to be, but because the orchestra is so large.
Yeah.
And yet, even with a large orchestra like that, it's hard for me to see it because everything's so small. And anyway, do your best to fit it all. 14 inches high, I think, is a nice limit to set.
Right. And then a separate little sheet for the choir with maybe a piano reduction on it or something. That's what I usually do.
I see a piano reduction, of course.
Okay.
Okay, so I can go on a bit. If anybody has any other questions, that's fine. Let's get that back up there. Yeah, letter I. Conductors should not expect you to supply copies at no cost to their organizations. This agreement should be worked out in advance. If you are to supply, I mean, they have to buy it from you. Even if it's not published, you should set a price. Definitely.
Harold, we did have one more question. Yeah. Jeff asks if, do you recommend do you recommend a standard size for acapella works, not too divisi?
Not what?
It says not too divisi, but I think meaning you know, if it's an acapella work and, you know, there's no
No, I'm not sure.
piano arrangement or.
There's no such
Jeff,
thing.
if you wanna unmute yourself, you can clarify your question as well, because I might not be
Octavo
reading it.
size is smaller than 8.5 by 11, right? So if Jeff wants to show his face and whatever, if there's not too much divisi, just have 4 staves if it's SATB. But if it's a 16 voice piece or an 8-part piece throughout, have 8 staves. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, he said paper size.
Well, I mean, look, the larger the better for singers. So even if you have SATB, if you want to have 2 staves on 8.5 by 11 paper, they'd like that. You know,
yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So back.
Okay, here's our.
You can go till 5 or 10 after. I don't mind. Yeah, let's go on. Adapting to the situation. Okay, you know which choir you're writing for, but how well do you truly know it? Just read that a little bit. Yeah. Are you, the last sentence of the first paragraph, are you willing to and able to adjust the level of difficulty of your piece to conform to the level of the choir? Well, a lot of, you know, important composers did that. I mean, look at Stravinsky writing Ave Maria and Pater Noster. These are really simple pieces. There are so many of our great composers who wrote extremely complex music, but simplified it for the choir, and just the opposite. If there's a professional chorus or really a phenomenal chorus that can do pretty much anything, go for it. If you want them to do something really complicated, do it. David Lang, who writes very simple music, you know, he wrote this piece called By Fire, I think I told you, which is really complex, in 1992. Okay, let's go on. Okay, do not mention the limitations you have observed to the conductor. Right. If a choir has limitations, just go back up for the previous page for a moment, the last. For most choirs, you will have to be more careful than in the above case. Perhaps you can attend a concert of the choir you will be writing for, or watch a video. Next page. Do not mention the limitations you have observed to the conductor. I'm sure the conductor knows the limitations of his or her choir. Simply write music that they can hopefully handle despite their shortcomings. And here are some tips. Obviously, I don't want to, change your style if you write a lot of polyphony, but homophony is much easier to manage. Subtle and frequent pinpointed cues will be eliminated or cut down substantially. In other words, if you notice that the conductor doesn't cue nicely, doesn't cue at all, like James Levine, what a terrible, no, of course he was a great conductor. He didn't have to cue, right? But you're not going to be working with world-class choruses, most of you and me, and so if really, seriously, if a conductor doesn't use the hands independently and doesn't cue, then homophony is easier to, than polyphony. If you have noticed that the conductor demonstrate little, well, that's what I just said, so that clear indications of crescendo and decrescendo are compromised or non-existent. There is not much you can do beyond curtailing the need for them, but when using them, putting both the Italian word and the corresponding signs in the score, crescendo, the word crescendo and the crescendo mark would get more attention than just using one of those notations. Limit the number of triplets, avoid quadruplets, quintuplets, and complex rhythms such as triplets entering on the and of beat 1. Well, that's so rare to do that, but I've had to deal with that and much more. Like instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, triplet, 3, 4. What if they have 1 and on the and the triplet starts 1 triple? It's like crazy. Keep rhythm, letter D, keep rhythms as traditional and simple as possible. Okay, letter E, write in English, German, French, Italian, Latin, or Spanish rather than in other languages. Curtail the number of high notes, especially if they are sustained or repeated. The more amateur the choir, the less beautiful they will sound, the less stamina. They can really hurt their voices if you do that. Restrain from using the most upper and lower notes in each voice part's ranges. Normally you can count on the above mentioned chart. Well, there's a chart above, here, but you can look that up online. Stick with 4-part writing and limit or eliminate divisi. Avoid tone clusters. They might be too difficult to achieve accurately. Avoid meter key and tempo changes as much as you can. Eliminate descriptive words that are not easily understood. Okay, forget that. Letter L. Avoid grace notes, which might be perceived as sloppy entrances by the audience. Really, if you have a pretty bad choir and you have all kinds of grace notes, not only one grace note, but 2 or 3 of them, there's very little chance they're going to do them together. I get mad at Benjamin Britten sometimes because even though I absolutely love his music, every one of his pieces, but so sometimes 1 or 2, in this piece called Voices for Today, or Voices for Today, I've done that 3 or 4 times, including I did it at the UN once. There are moments when if you do it exactly as marked, it definitely sounds like a mistake to the audience. So I get mad at him. Okay, the text is gone. Does that mean I'm being yanked off the internet here?
We have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Yes, so Kevin was asking how Canticum is rehearsing over the pandemic.
We are not rehearsing. I refuse to do these online rehearsals. Everything has to be metronomic, and it's just, it would be not much fun for me to do that. I'm just doing these. I'm doing these interviews that like Karina might talk about, or I can just talk about them with famous. We started a series called the Choral Connection. I've interviewed, I think, 17 people so far, including some of the great conductors in the world and composers. So we'll start up in the fall. I'm very, very, very sure of that. Well, I mean, as sure as one can be in this situation, but yeah, we're not rehearsing now. But I am doing I'm doing an outdoor concert in June with 4 members of my New York Virtuoso singers. We'll rehearse outdoors. We'll do an outdoor concert. The New York City Department of Cultural Affairs will find a spot for us. I don't know where. Yeah, it'll just be nice madrigals and spirituals and some sacred music and a little bit of this, a little bit of that to appeal to the public. Awesome. Okay, what else?
And Brian asked, Brian, feel free to unmute yourself if you prefer, but what would you qualify as a high note to avoid sustaining for each part? So I think he means, we have, you've given the chart saying what is out of range, but where would you say that it's too high in terms of, being...
I just did a piece by a composer who had a high C sustained for like 8 measures. That's crazy, obviously. By the way, my grandson Jesse can sing up to a C, which is the highest note on the piano. And when his mother was 12, she could sing up the scale chromatically to an A flat, an octave and a -6 above the soprano high C, but he goes a major third above that. Anyway, that's neither here or there. High B flat would be difficult also. I would not do that. High A, sure.
Okay. And Brian, if you have follow up, please feel free to ask. Is there any other...
What about for other voice parts?
Okay. For an alto, you don't want to do high Fs, F an 11th above middle C. You don't want to do that. High E, it really depends on the group. In other words, I'm not a voice teacher, but I'm just talking from experience. With a good college choir, they have a lot of young women in college choirs have high B flats, they're healthy vocal cords and stuff like that. And the altos can go really high, but not, when you're with an older bunch, a chorus with a lot of older people, you don't want to have the altos sing a sustain above, let's say, a C even, but with the younger voices or professional voices, you can do a D, E flat, but they can hit Fs, but I wouldn't sustain Fs. For tenors, it's sort of the same thing in the scenario, but I mean, in the Missa Solemnis by Beethoven, I believe there are some sustained A's. I mean, professional singers can sustain high A's, not for 10 measures, it's crazy. But in college choirs, most of them don't even have good G's, and even to hit, no less sustain. So I would limit, again, like limiting older women in amateur choirs to altos to like a C. I would limit tenors to an F, F sharp, and basses or baritones, let's say. A D is fine. E flat, again, the younger voices can do an E flat, E natural. Older voices, I wouldn't go that high, maybe a D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any last minute questions while people are thinking? I will kind of go back to the beginning when I had a little bit of a coughing fit, and I'll finish up my spiel. If you were late or you had to leave early or you just want to see it again, I will have the recording of this video up on the Google Drive. We'll send you out the link once again for you to view whenever you would like. And all of our past sessions are there as well for you to view. So please take advantage of that if that is helpful for you. Is there any last questions here or last comments that you want to make, Harold?
Take a look on YouTube at Thea Musgrave interview. If you like, it's like a 30-minute interview. You learn a lot about her and her 92-year-long life.
And on Sunday, we'll premiere the interview with John Harbison, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, correct?
Oh yeah, John Harbison. What great music! Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
So that'll be premiered on 7:30 on Sunday on YouTube, and the links will be on social media if you want to check that out.
And next week we'll have 4 professional singers, so tell your friends about it. And then in 2 weeks we're going to have singers submitting either singing live a little piece with accompaniment maybe, or submitting a video of them singing, and some 4 other professional singers will critique them gently. Suggestions. All right, well, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. Next week is our third is our third session again with these 4 singers, so please join us and spread the word. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.